Hello, today's video is going to be on corresponding parts of congruent triangles and the fact that if the parts are corresponding and the triangles are congruent, then those corresponding parts are going to be congruent. So we look at our first example. We know that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. The two triangles are congruent, which means they have the same shape and they have the same size. We want to identify which pieces are corresponding, and therefore we can identify which pieces are congruent. It's all about the statement. The statement tells you everything that you need to know. When I look at my statement, it says triangle ABC. Since A is the first letter, angle A is going to be congruent to angle D. Since A is the first letter and D is the first letter, those are corresponding positions, which means angle A is going to be congruent to angle D. Then I go next, we have angle B and angle E. B is the second letter, E is the second letter. Therefore, angle B is congruent to angle E. Notice that my triangles are not facing the same direction. They are not in corresponding order. The orientation of them has changed. I have to go on this statement, not by the order they are in the picture, because angle B is congruent to angle E there. And last, that leaves angle C and angle F. Now, in order for a triangle to be congruent, we know all parts are congruent. In a triangle, we have 3 angles, and we also have 3 sets of sides. Everything is going to be congruent. We just showed that we had 3 sets of corresponding angles congruent. Now we have 3 sets of corresponding sides, so sides that are falling in that same order. We see that AB are the first 2 letters in the first statement, and DE is the first 2 letters in the second statement. Therefore, I know segment AB is congruent to segment DE. We can get all of this information from that statement. When we see that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, it puts all of our pieces in corresponding order for us. The next 2 letters in the first one are BC, the next 2 are EF, so I know that segment BC is congruent to segment EF. And last, A is the first letter, C is the last letter, so segment AC is congruent to segment DF. When you're going through and marking your triangle as congruent, think back to our Unit 1 that we use indicators. Indicators tell us which pieces are congruent. So every new set of pieces needs to get a new indicator. Notice that I didn't use the same indicator more than once, and I only use it if the pieces themselves are congruent. So make sure that you are paying attention to that as you are marking up your diagram so that you don't accidentally confuse yourself and think that 2 pieces are congruent that are not. So we use this idea that corresponding parts are congruent, giving us congruent triangles. We're going to name congruent triangles based on how my diagram is marked up. When I look at example 2, the first thing I want to do is name the first triangle. I can do this any way I want. The first triangle isn't going to determine whether you're right or wrong. It's the second triangle and how you match up your pieces. So when I look at this first triangle, I have triangle ABC. So I just picked an order, A, then B, then C. When I go to name the second triangle, I want to look at how those pieces in ABC fell. So I look at A. I look at the indicator at A. I go to my next triangle and I find out where is that same indicator. And that same indicator is at D. So I'm going to say that triangle D comes first. The second letter I chose before was B. Angle B has this indicator, which is 2 lines. So I look at my second triangle and I see F. So the next letter is going to be F because angle F is congruent to angle B, and B came second. F has to come second, which leaves us with our last C and E. So triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. And remember that there are many ways I could have done this. For example, we'll just do one more. Instead of going ABC, let's pretend that we went triangle BAC. So here's B. Since I listed B first, the angle that's congruent to B is F. And then I went to A, which is corresponding to D, and last to C, which is corresponding to E. Again, as many different ways as I can order these letters, I can order these letters as long as your corresponding pieces are set up. And you can double check your statement there. We see AB. AB is marked with our squiggly. We have DF. Oh, and DF is marked with our squiggly. So our corresponding segments are congruent. Then we have segment BC. Segment BC should correspond to FE, and it does, and that leaves our last two sets. Remember, your statement's going to tell you all 6 pieces of information that you know to be congruent. There are 3 sets of corresponding congruent angles and 3 sets of corresponding congruent side lengths. All right, example 3, solve for x and y. The most important part of this is that statement, triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. What we just discussed is that statement right there tells us exactly which angles are congruent and exactly which side lengths are congruent. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. You can use this statement to write out all 3 sets of congruent angles and all 3 sets of congruent sides, or we can use this to just draw our diagram. And I think the diagram is helpful because when we draw our diagram, we can draw it in corresponding order. Our last example, number 2, notice how our pieces went opposite directions. Everything was kind of out of order there. When we look at this one, since I'm drawing the diagram, I'm going to draw it where I want my pieces to be. So A, B, C. Since I went A down here, I'm going to go D down here. D, E, F. I'm going to draw my 2 triangles so that all of the corresponding pieces are matching up to each other. And then I'm going to label what I have. I have segment 2x is AB, BC is x plus 40, DF is x plus 5, and EF is 2x plus 10. Then we have that angle A is 2y, angle B is y plus 15, angle D is 70 degrees, and angle F is 45 degrees. All right, so now we need to solve. We need to look at corresponding pieces. As I go through, we see that we have AB. I look at the other diagram, and I look at the segment that are in the same spot as AB, which is DE. Those are my 2 corresponding sides. If they're corresponding, the triangles are congruent, the pieces are congruent. I know AB, I don't know DE, so I can't write a statement there. Then we go to BC. BC corresponds to EF. I do have both of those pieces, therefore I can write an equation because corresponding pieces are congruent. So I can write x plus 40 is equal to 2x plus 10. We move our x over. 40 is equal to x plus 10. Subtract our 10 over, and we find that x is going to be equal to 30. Just in case we wanted to, that last piece AC is corresponding to DF. We don't know AC, we know DF, so we couldn't write an equation there anyway. Again, because we drew our diagram, we purposely drew it in corresponding order so that I could just visually see the sides and angles that matched up. We go to our next solving for y. We look at corresponding angles. This angle is in the same spot as this angle. Corresponding angles are congruent. Well, I know 2y and I have 70, so there's my second equation. 2y is equal to 70. We divide by 2 and we find that y is 35. Now we could continue going around. This angle corresponds to this one. I know angle B, I don't know angle E, so we can't solve there. And last, C and F. We don't know angle C, We do know angle F, so I can't go ahead and solve there. So you want to find out a segment or angles where we have both sets of congruent corresponding sides. Corresponding sides are congruent, therefore we set them equal to each other. All right, that is all for our Cpctc video.